Welcome to Conversations with Chuck Hester, a weekly podcast designed to inform and entertain you, all while introducing you to some really interesting and inspiring people. Today's episode is brought to you by Market Muse, the content platform where you can publish fearlessly using content intelligence. And I'm your host, Chuck Hester. Today's guest is a very interesting person. I got a chance to get to know her, and a shout out to Robert Seeger for putting this together. And if Bob's on listening or the replay, thank you for that. But our guest today is Jonni Reddick, and Jonni is a law enforcement veteran with 29 years in law enforcement, who now works with police executives in law enforcement and public safety, as well as CEOs in corporate, government, and nonprofit businesses. Her coaching focuses revolves around building trust and legitimacy and creating engaged leadership to build wholehearted and inclusive organizations. Welcome, Jonni.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me. And I sound so awesome the way you say it.
Yeah, when you write it out and then somebody else, yeah, exactly. When I get my introductions, I feel the same way. It's like, wow, that's pretty cool. That works out really well.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to start out because we've had conversations, and as I mentioned, Bob Seeger put us together basically by saying, these are the people you need to be connecting with, and we took it from there. And my latest LinkedIn poll was, okay, don't you do a 15-minute conversation? I mean, that's the way you deepen your conversations, which I do on a regular basis, and be able to work through that. So we got a chance to have that conversation, and from that, basically I said, you know what, this is a conversation I want to have, and I think my listeners will enjoy as far as that goes. But let's start with your law enforcement background, because you are a retired assistant chief for the California Highway Patrol, and you did do this for close to 29 years, which is pretty amazing. And thank you for your service, first of all. But walk us through it. Tell us how that started. How did you get into law enforcement? And along the way, some of the milestones that you did.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, you had said, I think when you sent me just kind of email to kind of frame our thoughts, you said my origin story. Mm-hmm. And I was like immediately taken back to being a kid when I loved comic books. I absolutely adored comic books. I think that's probably where I learned to read, was comic books and all the superheroes. And they always had an origin story, right? And so, for me coming up, I was raised by a single mother. And, we struggled financially, living with family, living in shelters, living from city to city, sometimes several times in 1 year. So it was very broken and fractured. And so when I got to the age of graduating high school, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. So I took some junior college and I became a typist clerk for the county. And then around 21, there was this huge ad in the newspaper. And we actually had tangible newspapers back then.
Yes.
And it had this huge ad for the California Highway Patrol, and it showed, what it would pay, but it really showed, this service and security and the benefits that were kind of, long-term thinking. And I hadn't had that growing up. And so I wanted to try it. And many people said I shouldn't do it because I was a woman. What are you thinking? And I was like, I was an athlete. I played basketball. Plus I, was kind of hard-headed. I was like, you know what, I'm going to try it. And in 6 months later, I was in an academy. I'm not, prior military, have no law enforcement in my family. And here I was kind of pushed out into this policing world, which is traditionally, male. So it was quite an experience from my lens. And also, I'm biracial. I'm half Black and half white. So it was a whole new world of understanding. And to be quite transparent, I wasn't mature enough. I wasn't ready. But what my journey did was really build the capacity for me to be better and to also start to think about what leadership really looks like. And so, I was in our northern part of California and sent to the southern part of California, which I had never really been to. And through my career, I, was an officer in the field for 10 or 11 years. I went to sergeant, then after that as lieutenant. And then I was a captain, and I was a captain in 2 locations. And one of those, I was the first female captain in that command in the history of our department. And then I promoted to assistant chief. my last 4.5 years that I worked in two very large divisions, one for people who might be aware of our San Francisco Bay Area. So I was an assistant chief over there, huge population, density. And then in our Sacramento region, which is kind of the capital area of California, is where I retired as an assistant chief. And so for me in executive leadership as, a female of color, I'm less than 1% and probably less than that of that position in the entire country for law enforcement and policing, and definitely less than 1% for our organization there at the Highway Patrol, which has over 11,000 members and over 7,000 sworn members.
Yeah, and should be mentioned too. I mean, people can do the math, but this was 1988 when you first started out, in early 90s.
Yeah.
So when you're saying a female of color and moving up in the ranks, that's was not as usual as we're hoping to move forward on that kind of stuff. It's interesting to see where that goes, and so you were basically all over California, but mostly in Northern California. Is that right? Sacramento?
Yeah. So when I first came on, like I said, that ad in the paper, I grew up on ships. So I thought, I'd be hang gliding and surfing and, doing this thing on the job. So Southern California was like a great, opportunity. But then I kind of managed my way up the Bay, which is our coastal side.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up in our Central Valley and Valley for, the majority of the rest of my career. So it was kind of divided.
Yeah. So how, I know for a fact, because you and I have had this conversation, how did the transition from what you were doing in law enforcement, how did you transition that into coaching and then into a coaching business? Because what you and I talked about offline basically is what I call the passion pivots through COVID to a certain extent, and COVID kind of magnifies that or causes issues, and we'll talk a little bit later about that as well. But I think I understand why coaching, but walk us through, how did you decide, okay, I want to be a coach? Because a lot of people out there say, coaching, that sounds like fun. Anybody can do that, those type of things. But, there are obviously requirements in order to make it work well. But what sparked your interest?
So, coming up through the organization, like I said, I knew, looking back, and probably even at the time, I probably wasn't mature enough to really understand, what do we say? We don't know what we don't know. And so, after my first promotion, I really started having this, bigger vision, and what we call in policing a high visual horizon. So when we're taught high-speed driving, we're told not to look at the hood ornament because that narrows our vision, but for us to look up and see, further down the road so we can avoid, any hazards. We can make lane changes if we're driving fast. It's a driving technique. So I use it actually as a metaphor for, seeing my own leadership and my own vision in the organization. And so after my first promotion, which was very difficult to do, I had to take the test 3 times. Wow. I didn't like that. I didn't have a lot of help that first exam, and I didn't like the way that there was nobody helping me and sometimes others. And so after that, I started study groups to be able to start to help other people not have to work so hard, to be able to figure out what a process is even like, but also understanding what leadership starts to look like. And it planted the seed for me. And I had a great mentor who did that for me later. And I just kind of modeled that, and then I amplified it. So every promotion that I was getting, I went from being at the bottom of the list because I really started to apply myself and be intentional, but I was also helping others, which really, re-emphasized my knowledge, right? That I began going to the top of the list. And so that kind of planted the seed for me to start wanting to coach, be more than a mentor, because mentors are great. But coaches really create the structure and the discipline and the goals and the outcomes, and they follow you through that. And, I taught training from first line supervisors, middle managers, and executive staff for like 10 or 15 years of my career. And I started facilitating even more so towards the end. But it was really what people were coming to me outside of that, which was for this coaching piece. And so after I retired, I adjunct teach now. My first year, I started adjunct teaching because I love being a teacher and I love contributing. And so I adjunct for the University of San Diego in a law enforcement and public safety leadership program. It's an online graduate program. And we have law enforcement executives from all over the country. So those perspectives are, different and similar. And I get to be a part of that and be influenced in that change in the profession. And then I also decided to start adjunct teaching at our local community college in criminal justice, but it's also a regional police academy for law enforcement agencies local to be able to get candidates to bring into their organization. And so I do professionalism, leadership, and ethics. And I'm also working on an advisory committee where we are looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion and how to create, better course content and to grow those conversations. And out of that, actually, I've had some partnerships with, a lot of different entities, but one that I've been a part of for like 2 decades is the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, which is known as NOBLE, and creating pathways and pipelines and partnerships to be able to recruit and bring candidates into the policing profession. So we're working across lines, which is really great that we're starting to come together. And out of all of this, I've just enjoyed it so much that, about 1.5 years ago, I was like, well, you know what? Maybe I should become a business and start to explore what this leadership looks like in this coaching and consulting and helping people be able to identify, what we call blind spots, but really they're not blind. Sometimes we see them, we just don't have time, or we don't know how to prioritize, or we don't really know what it is that we really don't know again, right? And so hopefully with my experience and all the exposure and how I stay contemporary, I can come in and I can be that person to help you create that, develop it, train your teams. If you need training, I do that. And so, that's kind of how it developed and evolved. And I'm just really thoroughly enjoying it.
Well, and that's one of the things you and I've talked about, and I talk about it on a regular basis. And by the way, we're on episode 13, which is amazing to me, just that aspect of it. But I call it the passion pivot. And I think, well, the rocket fuel, if you will, was COVID to a certain extent. And, the other phrase I use is COVID blessings to be able to say, okay, this is what I'm really passionate about. And this is how I want to, and the other aspect of that is how I want to pay it forward to other people and how I want to contribute, which is a lot of what you're talking about there. So it's that combination, and I think, quite frankly, you're an inspiration to on a serious level to multiple levels to folks in regards to, okay, I'm young, I'm female, I'm black, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this type of thing, or even to, hey, you know what, us old white guys, where they go, hey, we need to do something, and we want to be able to contribute back. So it's fascinating to see how people are starting to embrace the passion pivot, if you will, do what you love what you do type of thing. And for you, as well as me, love who you're doing it with. I mean, that's kind of the interesting aspect of it for that. So I think, timeliness is always godliness as far as I'm concerned. So, I'm happy about that for us as well. But the interesting part for me is, you had a choice, I think, basically to say, I'm going to be a law enforcement consultant. I'm going to be a coach just in law enforcement. But what you're starting to find is, and talk about this if you would, the lessons that you learn, the things that you're teaching in the law enforcement arena can then be translated over into corporate leadership, nonprofit leadership, and the like. So, I think that to me, easily, not easily, but you could become a law enforcement consultant. You're not. But you chose to say, you know what, CEOs need to hear this and teams need to hear this leadership. So talk to me more about what you do in the corporate and the nonprofit world as well.
So what I find is much of what all of us do, despite what industry we're in, is all relatively the same. It's just about what particular, specification or specialized thing that we're doing. So for example, let's just use the big umbrella of communication. This is a huge challenge no matter what industry you're in. So, for example, we talk about emotional intelligence. We all need that in our leadership, in our organizational culture. It's just how it's delivered, right? And if this becomes the conversation that you have with CEOs who want you to come in, and I just want to back up just a little bit.
Sure.
Leadership starts with the person at the top. And so a lot of times what I find when I'm speaking to people who want something for their teams or for their organization, which is absolutely 100% yes, do not forget what you need as a leader. Because sometimes you get into a position and you forget that you still need coaching. You still need something because our leadership changes. And we may take an occasional course or we might be part of a program, but generally it's not long lasting. It ends at some point, right? So you want to, increase that quotient for yourself. And so, one of the areas that I find is a common theme, again, is this communication, which, really can drive, productivity and morale and job satisfaction, but it can be broken out into all kind of other things. It could be, like I said, the emotional intelligence, but it's deeper. How do you build trust and legitimacy? We talk about that in policing all the time. But how do you do that in your corporate culture? What does trust look like? How do you create legitimacy internally for you and how your staff see management, but also externally to, your responsibilities to social issues, to the communities and clients and consumers that you serve? I mean, this is all over right now. If you look at, for example, Super Bowl just came up, right? And you look at all the different sponsors and how they reshape their advertising campaigns. So that's like an outward marketing. But what about the, real considerations for what are you doing in the conversations with your employees? They can be sensitive ones, right? But if they need to be talked about, but sometimes you may not be the messenger. Your staff may not be the one to facilitate or do that because it's too sensitive. And so these are kind of the deep discussions often had on trying to get through some of these DEI and understanding, our biases, whether they're implicit, and if they're explicit, then there should be, some other procedures in place for that, for accountability and employee misconduct. But that's the thing. I have a background in everything: risk management, employee misconduct, public trust and legitimacy, working in succession, understanding, a strategic visioning. Even though I don't do strategic visioning, I can help you to see the things you can in the places maybe you can't, because I have this background and this lens of being exposed to all of it and still working contemporarily with students to help them build theirs. And so, it's just a place where I think there's a lot of crossover for a lot of things. And I just believe that, where I'm at now has placed me in such a unique position, because I'm also in a space where I'm helping police conversations with the community and what we call community engagement and strategies, and helping build curriculum, but also helping to build the conversations that bridge what we know is so vitally needed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I've been on your website, but I want to take 2 seconds just to kind of read one thing in regards to your coaching and executive and middle management. And you talk about focusing on building a whole leader who understands the quality of leadership involves emotional intelligence, critical conversations, transformational leadership, sophisticated critical thinking, strategic vision, and collective collaboration. A large menu, no doubt about that, as far as what goes with that. And it's interesting because we talked about, okay, my podcast is about marketing communications and social media and paying it forward. And you're covering a lot of those lines, and marketing in particular. One of the things that I talk with my clients about on a regular basis is that, yes, you have external customers, but you also have the internal customer, and that is the employees and the team members. And I call it the New York Times test. If they don't understand what your company stands for and they're not comfortable with it, New York Times calls and happens to get a receptionist or whoever, and she's not answering or he's not answering the right way. I mean, that becomes an issue. So the messaging and what that looks like is behind. Let's, I told you, I'm not a political podcast per se, but I'm fascinated by how this works in communications in particular, everything that we have gone through, not just with COVID, but with all of the unrest and everything that's happening, and, understanding each other better, because I think that's something that it's a work in progress at the minimum as to how to do this. And one of the things, again, I talk with my clients in regards to COVID is you need to be careful not to pander, but to actually mean what you're talking about. And that's kind of the other aspect. So what do you mean by inclusive leadership? What do you mean by how can someone in a CEO position, VP, whatever it may be, start to be more inclusive both externally and internally?
That's a great, I so appreciate you just even, raising the conversation, because a lot of times avoidance works for some people. So inclusion is just what it is. It's including. It's being thoughtful to think of to include, right? So oftentimes you can be in a space that is familiar and comfortable, and you're not even thinking about the conversation of including somebody else that might have a different lived experience. And so, one of the things that people, when they're looking at their succession plans, is looking at their processes and things in place for not only, onboarding into an organization that goes, all the way to recruiting, to bringing in, onboarding, and then what your succession and hiring and promotion looks like. It becomes about, what is it that you really want to accomplish, from this wholehearted place of your company values and mission, and especially what you want reflected out to your consumers, clients, or the community, and which is going to hold you accountable to these things, right? So, for example, let's say you have a board and your board is not reflective of diversity in color, maybe gender, culturally, all of these different things. But nobody ever brings it up because, this is the board and we're talking to, they get along and we've been doing this. But yet you have employees in your organization who feel siloed. They feel alone. They don't feel like they fit. They don't feel comfortable. They have to assimilate in order to, be okay in the environment. And maybe they brought up a complaint. Maybe there was one or two. But because it's only one or two, it can't possibly be something that, is that permeating in our organization. And like you said, instead of maybe not avoiding or pandering, you need to lean in and you need to take a look at your culture and you need to be transparent. And man, this word authenticity is huge. Take an authentic look. Don't be afraid of what you find. And if you find something that you shouldn't find, then address it. I think this is the atmosphere of, it's okay to say when you didn't know or you've made a mistake or how do you want to do better, versus denying it and saying there's not a problem. That is the biggest problem, is when you say there's not a problem and there's obviously something that's surfacing. So you need to address it. If you don't know within your organization how to be inclusive of people, then maybe get yourself an advisory board that's outside of your board, right? They can be community stakeholders. They can be, different segments of your organization that help you to see at a level that you're not looking. What I loved about the organization for the CHP is whenever we were putting together a big initiative, we brought in not only me as an assistant chief to perhaps lead the committees or whatever. We tried to really bring in a swath of people that had different lenses from their classifications, the jobs they did within, the department, from outside the department, gender and culturally different backgrounds, educational different backgrounds, just to be inclusive so we could try to cover what we could. And we weren't perfect. But the beauty of that process is it amplifies, again, your authenticity to the organization, to your people, because your people are what run your business, right? And so when you show that, it builds trust, it builds legitimacy to them, and it translates out into, again, to that outward stakeholder that you have. And so, there's a lot of different dynamics to being inclusive for diversity and equity, but really, if we take it at its simplest term, it's just include. Look around, open up your lens, and include people that are not like yourself. And it may feel uncomfortable and it may be awkward, but if you do it the right way, it can be very powerful.
Interesting. The Reader's Digest of that, if you would, is if you want to be inclusive, start including people. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. So I love the idea of an outside advisory board that allows you to, because I know startups and ones that, start getting funding, there are certain board members have to be there, all of that stuff. But having an advisory board, one of the things that does is tells the community that you are trying and you're working towards getting better. And I think a lot of CEOs, VPs, owners, whatever it may be, need to hear the fact that this is not something that you take a pill and you're done, or you have a band-aid, or you take a 30-minute course or a seminar or whatever and all of a sudden you're inclusive. It doesn't work that way. The best thing that they can hear is it's okay to say I don't know, or I'm working on it and it's a work in progress and I want help from my employees and whatever. I can't think of a better way, because I've been in a bunch of large corporations, to be able to come to your employee base and say, here's what we're going to do, and we need volunteers to be helping us make this happen. And a CEO standing up and saying, I don't have the answers. I really don't. And I'm looking to you to help those answers, or an outside person like yourself to come in and make that work. So
Yeah,
some really
absolutely. I think vulnerability is huge, and it's a strength for leaders. I've found that too many times, being a chief, that I'm supposed to know everything, have all the answers. And in crisis moments, I'm supposed to be the strength for everybody else, which I am. But it's also important to them that I show that I'm human and I'm vulnerable, and that I'm not perfect, because perfectionism, man, does that destroy us, for us high performing individuals, right? And so, it becomes a mindset issue, or we put up blocks to what we think we could do or should do, or how will it look? When really, if you're wholehearted and you're authentic and you do what you know that you need to do and you have the courage to do it, it's amazing the results you get. And, it's transformative. It just really is.
Yeah. Yeah. And you actually answered the question I was going to ask before I ask it. But that is, as a leader, how do I look vulnerable without appearing weak? I mean, is one of the things I would hear on a regular basis from folks. Oh, I can't open up to my employees because then, they want a strong leader, and that's who I'm supposed to be. Gender aside, it doesn't matter as far as that
Mm-hmm.
goes. But being able to say, hey, you know what, I don't know, and I'm opening up to you. This is what it looks like, and still being that strong leader and the person that
Absolutely.
has got the vision as far as where that goes. So fascinating stuff as far as that happens. Let's shift gears just a little bit, because and shout out to the folks that have got comments. Most of them are just just saying you're dead on, and this is exactly what we're talking about. So we appreciate that. So we're in the middle of, as we talked about this earlier, I never call it the new normal. It's the new reality. Welcome to, I have a tendency to say 2020.2, if you will. So, 2021 is still a continuation. We are making progress on certain things here and there, but I don't think this is going anywhere for at least a year or so to be able to figure this out. How has COVID and the issues that we run into, how's that affected your business, number one? And then the second part of that is, how's it affected the business of the clients that you're working with?
Well, of course, it's affected everybody. And I know we're here talking about clients in business, but we've had so many who have been devastated by, loss of loved ones and family members. And if they, if it's not a loss, then they've been impacted in some way with someone who's been, very sick, or it affected them economically with all the different variations of shutdowns and uncertainty. And so it's just been really, extremely, incredibly difficult and hard. And, we want to thrive, right? But there is this part of, we have to survive as well in different ways in order to, really see ourselves thriving. And, for me, it's just a lot of things have gone virtual. So, I find it interesting that people were hesitant about virtual because of, the level of engagement that you could have, or building trust and relationships through this kind of a space. So, when can you meet, and how can we meet you personally? But we're starting to learn how to leverage technology, and be able to be just as effective. And so, that was one of the big transitions in the beginning. And the same for clients are open, I think, or at least I'm finding, open to new ways of helping to provide the level of service, through, and as long as it can create engagement. And I think if we just wrap our mind around that, not that we're not going to physically start going back to things at some point, but you might still continue to have hybrid. Because if you can create the engagement and you can create the experience and the, outcome that you want for the service you're providing, which is really changed behaviors, changed minds, changed hearts, better workers, more productivity, innovative ideas through the experience, then I think that's what you're looking for. And so a lot are being more open to, exploring new innovative ways to do that, right? Because it's a new space and new things are popping up all the time. And so that's what I love is it's this opportunity. It's a time for opportunity and to really try things that maybe traditionally, because we'd always done a meeting this way or we'd always done a training this way, you can now see things and try it a new way.
Yeah, it really makes sense. I mean, I've been a consultant off and on most of my career, and I remember remote LinkedIn calls on Skype, and started that early on. I am embracing and loving the fact that all of a sudden my clients understand Zoom and appreciate it. Like I've got a client that on a daily basis they will do a 15-minute huddle in the morning with all of their staff, and it's over Zoom, and it works, and it works well. It's actually over WebEx, but still same general idea. The interesting part about this is I think there's an education process that's happened at least over the last 6 months or so in regards to the Zoom culture, if you will, and being able to be productive using the technology that we had, as you mentioned. It's interesting to see how that's kind of all evolving as we go along. So, I'm embracing it, and this is a good example, for instance, that we can do this type of thing on a regular basis and be able to work it through. So, now, Jonni, my favorite subject, and that is social media. I always ask this question of any of my guests, which is, what's your favorite platform? How are you using it? And I'll add another thing to it I haven't done before, which is, what don't you like?
Okay. So I will tell you that being in policing for 29 years, all of our social media was often done by one of our staff. And, so I never really had to personally engage it. So I didn't really understand it. So Facebook was like my first, breakthrough kind of thing, but not really knowing what to do. And then I discovered LinkedIn a while ago, but I didn't know really how to leverage it. I didn't know what its purpose was. And the beauty of, so LinkedIn has become my favorite. I use Instagram and Facebook, but LinkedIn, because you guys offered like mentors that pop up. And, I was a little shy. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but they gave me like 3 or 4 people. And I reached out to one of them. And I want to give just a quick shout out to Jake. If he does watch this, I noticed he liked the post. So I did not know this gentleman at all. And he used to work at Salesforce. And so when I reached out, my business was brand new. And they gave me quality tips and information on things to consider. And one of the things he said, and that I still do to this day, is he said, give yourself a little bit of time first thing in the morning to go on LinkedIn and engage people. And he said, be authentic in your engagement and work to build your connections. And I've done this probably for the last year and a half, where I think I might have had like 20 or something, connections to, I'm over 500, which to me is great. But what was the beauty of it was really the connecting piece, the engagement that you do. And so I really enjoy LinkedIn for that. And I love, love, love what, you and Bob Seegert are doing, where you just create connections and pathways for people to come together. So it doesn't feel like I have to be on here, which is not my intent. You're highlighting me and my business, but I don't want to be on here selling to people. I really want to be on here to be connected to people so that we can come together, we can collaborate, we can talk about things. I can be of service, they can be of service, but it doesn't always have to be, I got to be careful of somebody trying to pitch me something. And so that's what I love about LinkedIn, is it's this wonderful professional community, really trying to support and help people to move forward in whatever it is they're doing. And so I absolutely love it. I'd have to say I'm learning how to do Twitter. So if I was to not like one, it's only because I don't know what I don't know about Twitter yet, but I'm hoping to get better.
No. Well, you basically read the script that I wrote for you as regards to as a LinkedIn trainer. And it's like, yeah, this is, honestly, for me, LinkedIn is all about engagement. And we were talking about this. I put out a poll recently of, those, it seems to be more commonplace these days, but I always would connect with someone and say, okay, let's do a 15-minute phone call, get to know each other better. maybe 60% of them would say yes. About 20% would say, what are you trying to sell? Which I'm not about. I mean, there are services that I provide, and we get to that eventually, but that's not what that's all about. But it's interesting, yeah, because Bob, and I think some of my viewers may know this, but Bob is actually a former client of mine, who I like to say, the teacher is now learning from the student, if you will, and he's killing it on coffee with Bob every morning. So it's kind of fun to watch that going on. But and that kind of brings it all the way back around to how can people get in touch with you, and what's the best way to do that? I'm going to put up a banner here real quick for you, Jonni, in regards to your consulting organization as well. But tell us more about what's your favorite way to get in touch with someone.
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. And my website is JL Consulting Solutions. I'm also on Instagram as JL Consulting Solutions. And, I'd love to connect. I am also, publishing a book in the spring called Black, White, and Blue. It is my journey and my ascension through the leadership in the organization, but also my leadership challenges and the growth that took place. And it is a very vulnerable and open piece of work that I've been working on for several years. And, I'd love people on LinkedIn to be able to connect, to be able to support me in that, but hopefully in experiencing my story, that it will really, help leaders in healing and in their pathway and feeling like they're enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I told you I was doing this, but I'm monitoring comments, and a lot of good comments are coming in, and you are striking a definite chord in regards to all of that. Jonni, I greatly appreciate the time that you've taken.
Thank you.
This is a very important topic. In what you're doing, and on top of that, the communications, the marketing that you're experiencing as well, is also a good lesson for folks who are trying to figure out, okay, how do I make this passion become a real business, and what does that look like? You're a good example of moving forward on that, so I congratulate you on that.
Thank you.
I greatly appreciate the time we had today, and look forward to further conversations as we go along. So thank you, Jonni.
Absolutely.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Okay, so that's another edition of Conversations with Chuck Hester, and now I want to talk about a little bit about the Pay It Forward Minute, and that is my way of highlighting cool things in the Pay It Forward movement. Pay It Forward Tuesdays initiative. If you follow me, you understand that that's up and running and doing very well. Special shout out to all the folks in the Pay It Forward 6 now, which is Adam Sinkus, Jennifer Radke, Bob Shears, Lori Marrero, and Brian Basilico. And we will be announcing the newest recipient of our Pay It Forward initiative next Tuesday, February 16th. But the nomination process is always open. So if you know somebody who you think would be a good nominee, go to our website and get a chance to nominate them in, if you would. And that website is payitforwardtuesdays.org. So take some time to do that. And if you're a business or an organization, one of the coolest ways to get involved with the community, we are looking for sponsors to provide services and products in kind for our 2021 recipients. Great way to pay it forward and build brand equity as well, as I always like to talk about. So contact me more for details on that as we go along. And I want to take 2 seconds also to thank our sponsor, and that is MarketViews, where you can publish fearlessly using content intelligence. If you were go to marketviews.com, you can find out more information about that, and we greatly appreciate them being part of the program as well. Now, next week on February 17th, my guest is Phil Jones. He is the best-selling author of, let me do this right, sorry, hang on one second. Live TV, guys. So he is the best-selling author of really cool books called Exactly What to Say and Exactly What to Sell and Exactly Where to Start. So I think you kind of get the idea. Now, to date, over 2 million people have crossed 57 different countries, have listened to Phil's advice and benefited from his lessons. And as a result, they now know exactly what to say and what to say, and exactly how to make more out of their conversations count. So we'll be looking for a great conversation with him as well. Now, please feel free to share this podcast with your friends and connections. The replay will post very soon on YouTube and Facebook. Also through Anchor FM, the audio of the podcast can be found on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple, and many other channels. And of course, interested in learning more about how to improve your marketing or LinkedIn presence, or quite frankly, if you want to have a 15-minute phone call to talk to me about LinkedIn, Paying It Forward or Paying It Forward Tuesdays, just mention the podcast when you connect with me on LinkedIn or message me, and we'll set up a 15-minute discovery call. So that's it for this week. Until next time, this is Chuck Hester reminding you to stay well, stay connected, and always pay it forward.